I was tasked with looking at the career of David Poile. Somebody rightfully said in the comments that could take hours, days. I'm adding days. I'm going to try to condense this as much as I can. David Poile's kind of a polarizing figure. Everybody kind of agrees he's really good. But at risk of alienating people, my question is, how good is he? And that's a genuine question. Here are his recent trades. So let's look at him right now, right? This is what he's praised for. His most recent this year, he gets Kyle Turris. What Nashville gave up to get Kyle Turris is Samuel Girard, who they didn't have room for, Vlad Kamenev, who they don't need right now, and a second-round pick in this coming summer's entry draft. That's not that big of a risk, considering how high up Nashville is in the standings. They acquired PK Subban for Shea Weber. We all agree that's a win. And I think Montreal fans will say, yeah, that's a win for Nashville. At the time the trade was made, I defended it from both sides. But right now, as we stand a year and a half later, I'm saying, no, that's a win for the Nashville Predators. Johansson for Seth Jones. This was a controversial trade at the time it was made. Of course, it was made before PK Subban. There were some that felt that trading out Seth Jones was a mistake. I was one of those people who thought trading out Seth Jones was a mistake. And here's the funny thing. Seth Jones is going to the All-Star game at the end of the month. Ryan Johansson is not. Johansson is not likely to go to an All-Star game because Johansson doesn't play that flashy 50-goal scorer or 100-point guy, or he doesn't have that flashy play. But what Johansson has given Nashville is some excellent depth down the middle. James Neal was drafted or picked up years back from Pittsburgh for Patrick Hornqvist and Nick Spaling. I'm going to say this, Spaling and Hornqvist for Neal, I kind of qualify that as a draw. Hornqvist has been excellent. Neal eventually is gone as Vegas fodder. He's been very good in Vegas, but you can't give him the win for Vegas. Kelly Yarncroke, Patrick Eaves, and a third-round pick for David Legwand from Detroit. That's a huge win for David Poile. So those are just notable deals. There's a lot of trades. There's pages and pages and pages of trades. And that's what he's done in Nashville. Now, he's been Nashville's only GM. The career points leader in Nashville is David Legwand with 566 points, followed by Martin Erat for 41. He turned Erat into Philip Forsberg. I didn't forget that deal. I just don't need to write it up there because we all remember what happened. And we all know that that's one of the more lopsided trades in history. Philip Forsberg will end up on this list. Shea Weber, 443 points, of course, turned into PK Subban. Legwand was flipped for Yarncroke, Eaves, and a third-rounder. Timonen, 301 points. He eventually goes to Philly. Dumont, 267 points. He ended up in Buffalo, I believe. For wins leaders, Pekka Rinne's closing in on 300. He has 290. Next up's Thomas Vokoun with 161. Dunham, 81. Mason, 59. Ellis, 49. This, of course, is Chris Mason, not Steve Mason. Steve Mason didn't play for Nashville. And Dan Ellis with the 49 wins. The interesting part is with goaltenders. So Rinne was a steal in later rounds of the draft. And Vokoun was picked up as kind of an afterthought, at least to those of us who were watching. Dunham was supposed to be this big starter for them, and it kind of happened, and then it kind of didn't. But it was okay because Nashville's always been respectable. He has been the GM of two teams. Nashville, which is what I'm looking at right now from 1998 until now. The entire length of time that Nashville's existed. He's their only GM. He was the GM of the Capitals for 15 years before that, before he opted to become the Predators' leader. In his time in Nashville, they've missed the playoffs 8 times. They've lost in the first round 6 times. They've lost in the second round 3 times. And, of course, this past June, they lost in the finals. They've only had 2 coaches, Barry Trotz and now Laviolette. There is a lot of job certainty with Nashville. Nashville proves that you don't have to just have a knee-jerk reaction and fire the coach. That's not a solution. Barry Trotz had a very nice long tenure. And then this is the Washington record. Don't pay attention to that for right now. We'll get to that. The cap space currently for Nashville is $6.2 million, which is pretty incredible considering. And I'm looking right now at their lists. 4 restricted free agents this coming summer. UC Saros kind of stands out amongst their prospects, the guys in the minors, and there isn't really anybody else in the minors. It's listed as minors on Cap Friendly. Cap Friendly's got it wrong. Don't panic. They haven't got rid of them. Anders Lindback's going to expire. That's, he can re-sign if he wants. Lemelin, who has a modified no-trade clause, he's a UFA. This summer he makes $2.9 million. I would think he'd actually end up taking a pay cut if he stayed in Nashville. Salamaki is an RFA with arbitration rights at $612,000. Cody McLeod's a UFA, $800,000. Scott Hartnell's a UFA at $1 million. Hartnell probably winding down his career. After that, the next guy who's got a contract that's up is Austin Watson at $1.1 million, and then he's UFA. And Craig Smith's 2 years down the road at $4.25 million. The point I'm trying to make here is there really isn't a cap problem in Nashville. I mean, in 2 years, Ryan Ellis is up. He makes $2.5 million, so he's going to want a lot more money. But they can afford it. So Nashville's created a very solid... David Poile's created a very solid Nashville team. My only issue with Nashville over the last 20 years has been a lack of star power. They've lacked that big name. The closest I think they came was the rental that they had at the deadline years back. I didn't put it on the board. Where they brought in Peter Forsberg. Like, we're going for it. We're going to bring in Peter Forsberg. It's going to be... But, of course, it was a shadow of Peter Forsberg. Forsberg was available because he wasn't himself. He wasn't the player he'd been, or else he wouldn't have been on the market. And it didn't work out. Nashville got eliminated, and it kind of gets forgotten in the annals of history that Peter Forsberg spent any time as a Nashville Predator. One comment thrown at David Poile over the summer. I was one of the ones that did it. I found a Hockey News article yesterday when I was doing research for this, which mentioned this, is that David Poile brings in Nick Bonino for $4+ million a year. It's a mistake. It's too much money. He's not a second-line center. I said the same thing. I think basically the same day, according to the article. But the funny thing is, David Poile doesn't sit and wait for a team to fall apart. He doesn't sit and wait for months for things to work themselves out. I'm looking at Montreal and Edmonton when I say that. He is proactive in making changes when they need to happen. Whether it's bringing in PK, bringing in Johansson, bringing in Kyle Turris. Kyle Turris is that number 2 center they needed. And now Bonino's number 3. So now all of the talk about Bonino's signed for too much money and he's a number 3 center, he shouldn't be number 2. Yeah, that's kind of gone. And Turris is already signed for long term. They don't have to worry about signing Turris. And Johansson is signed until, well, it's a while from now at $8 million per. I still think Johansson's signed for too much money, but hey. And Turris is re-up for $6 million next year. Forsberg's on for $6 million until 2022. Arvidsson's at $4.25 million forever. And Arvidsson's going to look like a steal at that money if his points and goals keep up the way they've been over the last year and a half. There is a building of stars on this team. There's always been star defensemen. Whether you're talking about Shea Weber or Ryan Suter or Roman Josi, PK Subban, there's always been star defensemen in Nashville. There's always been good goaltending in Nashville. I think that's where David Poile has things figured out. Depth down the middle, depth on the blue line, and a stud that can go 29, 35 minutes a game. And that number 1 goaltender. Even in the midst of when the Flyers went to the final and people went, hey, you don't need a starter anymore. You just need a half-decent goaltender. No. Nashville's never strayed from the idea that you have your starter, you have your backup, and that's pretty much it. And if there's a goaltending controversy or a backup that needs more starts, David Poile's perfectly fine with trading him. Doesn't seem to concern him in the slightest. Now, if we're going to look way back, and with David Poile, you kind of have to use the Wayback Machine on this guy. I'm going to look all the way back to before most of you guys were around. The first deal this guy ever made was as the GM of the Washington Capitals. So in his time in Washington, the Capitals missed the playoffs once. Now, what's remarkable about that is, before David Poile took over, the Washington Capitals were the worst organization in hockey. And that included the Colorado Rockies. That 8-win season they had their first year, still the lowest total in the history of the NHL, and it really doesn't get better. Poile comes in, and just things start getting better. They only missed the playoffs once. They were out in the first round 8 times. They were out in the second round 5 times. They lost in the conference finals once. I don't know why I didn't put conference finals there, but that's what's meant to be there. I remember what it was. It was, well, wait, didn't they go to the finals? And then I went and looked, and I realized that was after Poile had left. So, yeah, they went to the finals, but anyhow, it does call into question one thing with David Poile. One uncomfortable topic. As great a GM as he is, and he won GM of the Year last year, and I have no quibble with that. Can he build a Stanley Cup champion? He has been a GM in this league since 1982. Missed 1 year. In all of that time, he's had one team go to the Stanley Cup Finals, and that was this year's Nashville Predators. Now, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Nashville. I'm not trying to say anything bad about Poile. But the Nashville Predators came in as a number 8 seed. What they did was remarkable, but it's largely something that they're not going to be able to replicate as a number 8 seed. If Nashville slides, they end up being the number 2 wild card again, they're not going to be able to replicate that. 2 years in a row is too much to ask for one team, of winning all those games on the road when you don't have home ice and all those other things. And I do ask myself, he builds good teams. Does he build great teams? So let's look at his track record with Washington. His first trade in Washington is September 9th, 1982. He trades Mike Palmateer back to Toronto for cash. Just take him. We don't need him. He then traded Rick Green and Ryan Walter to the Montreal Canadiens for Brian Engblom, Doug Jarvis, Rod Langway, and Craig Laughlin. Yeah, he acquired Rod Langway from the Montreal Canadiens. Largely considered a very lopsided trade, but I will say this, Ryan Walter had a very good career in Montreal, and I always thought that this trade being viewed as this huge win for Washington was a little bit overblown, but Langway had a great career in Washington. Dave Christian is then acquired from the Winnipeg Jets for a first-round pick that became Bobby Dallas. Bobby Dallas, career, Washington wins that one. Dennis Maruk is acquired by the Minnesota North Stars for a second-round pick that became Stephen Leach. Maruk is one of those guys that he scored a lot of goals. He belongs in my Hall of Fame, absolutely. But I can kind of understand why GMs were willing to part ways with a guy who scored a lot of goals. He then traded Torrey Robertson to Hartford for Greg C. Adams. I'll give him a mulligan on that. Greg C. Adams, nothing, no big deal there. Lee Norwood's acquired by Toronto for Dave Shand. He did acquire Larry Murphy from the Los Angeles Kings for Brian Engblom and Ken Houston. So Engblom's part of the trade from Montreal to Washington, and then is part of the trade. So somehow he trades for Engblom, trades away Engblom, and wins the trade both times. That's pretty impressive. Larry Murphy, very solid for the Washington Capitals. He traded Dean Evison and Peter Sidorkovich to the Washington Capitals for David Jensen. That's a loss. Dean Evison was a good player, and Sidorkovich had a half-decent career. But I will say this, at the time, Washington was stacked with goaltenders. Washington has always seemed to have at least 3 goaltenders in their organization who can play in the NHL. And it's nice at trade deadlines when you've got 3 goaltenders. Yeah, that's a nothing trade, so I'm not going to worry about that one. Let's go to the next page. Again, I'm just doing this while I'm talking to you guys so that, it's fluid. So that there's no... It's all pre-created, and anyways, you guys know what I mean. Those are not big deal. Pat Reagan acquired by the Bruins for Pete Peters. Peters, I don't think Peters played that long for Washington. Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah, I'll give him the win on that one. Yeah, he played longer for Washington than I thought he did. I knew he ended up back with Philly. I just thought it was quicker than that. Darren Veach acquired by the Red Wings for John Barrett, Greg Smith. Looking for a big one here. The New York Rangers acquired Bobby Carpenter in a second-round pick that became Jason Prosovsky, who never really made it. The Capitals acquired Bob Crawford, Kelly Miller, and Mike Ridley. Absolute win for Washington on that one. Yeah, there's no NHL guys there. Washington acquires Dale Hunter and Clint Malarchuk from the Quebec Nordiques for Gaetan Duchesne, Alan Hayworth and a first-round pick. Washington wins. Aw, crap, that first-round pick was Joe Sakic. He's not always a genius. It's one of those odd mistakes. This is why when people say, oh, well, I'm not worried about that draft pick. It's middle of the first round at worst. It's going to be a number 20 pick. It's not going to matter. Guarantee you, Capitals fans at the time are like, yeah, it's a decent return. What can a number 15 pick turn into? Joe Sakic. Now, where does he redeem himself here? He traded Paul Cavallini to the St. Louis Blues for a second-round pick that became Wade Bartley. That's not it. He acquired Mike Miller and Neil Sheehy for Grant Jennings and Ed Kastelek. That's not it. He got the rights to Jeff Courtnall for Greg C. Adams. That's kind of a win. Jeff Courtnall became a pretty good player for them. Not for very long, though. So, he had some kind of rough times. So, when people talk about GMs, no, this GM made this trade. He's not very smart. He's just terrible. Bad trades happen. Looking at his trades here. He trades Grant Ledyard and Clint Malarchuk and a 6th-round pick that became Brian Holzinger. So, he became an NHLer. In return, they got back Kelly Johansson and Byron Dafoe. Dafoe never really made it in Washington, but again, Washington always had 3 NHL-ready goaltenders. Minnesota North Stars acquire Mike Gartner and Larry Murphy for Dino Ciccarelli and Bob Rouse. I'll give him a saw-off on this one. A mild loss. Dino Ciccarelli wasn't Dino Ciccarelli anymore by the time he got to Washington. Not the way he'd been in his youth in Minnesota anyways. And Gartner was still Gartner. And Larry Murphy was fantastic. Larry Murphy got traded a lot for a guy who was a very good defenseman. Famously, the Toronto Maple Leafs pick up Lou Fancheschetti. Lou became kind of a crowd favorite in Toronto, even though he was a bottom 6 guy, but he became a big crowd favorite. But I'm not going to give you a loss for that, Mr. Poile. Let's see. The Boston Bruins acquired Dave Christian for Bob Joyce. I'm going to give Boston the win on that one. That was a big win for them. Yvonne Corvo acquired by the Hartford Whalers for Mike Liut. Liut again was near the end. He took Jeff Courtnall, packaged him to St. Louis for Mike Lawler and Peter Zezel. It's hard to award him a win on this, but I'll give him the saw-off in that Zezel had a pretty solid career as well. Courtnall was a guy, too, that got moved around a lot. I never thought he got the respect from teams in the beginning of his career that he got later, and he deserved it in the earlier part of his career, too. Joel Quenneville, acquired by the Washington Capitals for cash. Joel Quenneville would go on to be the big Q coach for Chicago. Al Iafrate, acquired by the Washington Capitals for Bob Rouse and Peter Zezel in 91. Iafrate had injury issues. Iafrate is highly likely to hit my Hall of Fame at some point soon. I was looking at cards of his this morning and said, you know what, Wild Thing definitely belongs in a Hall of Fame somewhere, and he's never going to make the NHL one. But Rouse and Zezel were useful for Toronto. Rouse was good, and he went on to win cups in Detroit, which, proved he was a pretty good defenseman. Iafrate, on the other hand, how long did Iafrate last in Washington? I know he ended up in Boston. He was there for about 2.5 years, all told. I'm just looking for any other notable deals here. Randy Burge acquired from Boston for Stephen Leach. That's a saw-off. They got cash from the Canucks for Robin Bawa. I would probably take the money. Robin Bawa was an enforcer. Just an enforcer. Great name. Just an enforcer. Mark Hunter and future considerations, which became of Yvonne Corvo for Nick Kyprios. I'll give him a win on that one. Dino Ciccarelli was traded to the Wings for Kevin Miller. I will give Washington a win on that one. So I gave them a loss on acquiring Ciccarelli. I think it was a win getting Miller for Ciccarelli. The thing I remember about Ciccarelli was that Scotty Bowman and he had a contentious relationship, and after Ciccarelli left Detroit and went to Tampa, I'm paraphrasing, but Bowman yelled something out to him during a pregame warm-up along the lines of, you can lose in Tampa too. Didn't like him. They traded out John Druce and a 4th-round pick to Winnipeg for Pat Elenick. I don't think Elenick played very long for them, though. He played, a grand total of 84 games before they traded him out. And I can't see a trade, which means they waived him. Yeah, I mean, Druce never really amounted to anything at the NHL level outside of his playoffs. He was always expected to be more because of that playoff. That playoff led people to think he was more than what he was. In 15 games, John Druce had 14 goals, 3 assists, 17 points in the 1990 playoffs, which led people to think, hey, this kid's going to be great, and then it just didn't happen. And he never replicated that playoff success in following playoffs either. So by the time they traded him, he was still a 20-goal scorer, but he had never become what he was supposed to be, and when he went to Winnipeg, he only scored 6 goals that season. So yeah, I'll give Washington the win on that one. Kevin Miller's traded to St. Louis for Paul Cavallini. Cavallini's return to Washington was short. Yeah, he only played 71 games. I don't remember how many games were played by Miller when he went back to St. Yeah. I'll give St. Louis the win on that one. Nah, I'm not. That's not worthy of discussion. Neither's that. Paul Cavallini was acquired by Dallas from Washington for future considerations, which became Enrico Ciccone. Enrico. He had to be a tough guy just because of his name. He may not have even intended to fight. Enrico was then flipped to Tampa with a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick for Joe Ricci, which was a saw-off. The Washington Capitals acquired Joe Juneau for Al Iafrate. I love what Iafrate did in Boston, but Joe Juneau for Washington was a win. Juneau's totals in Washington were pretty solid. He never got back to his rookie year. Joe Juneau was a victim of success as a rookie. 102 points his first full season in Boston, and he never had that form back. And in Washington, he struggled. That being said, I'm afraid he had a lot of injury issues in Boston. I enjoyed him, but I'm going to give the win to the GM from Washington on this one. They acquired Rick Mrazek and Mark Tenorti for Kevin Hatcher. I'm going to give Dallas the win on that one. Hatcher was key for Dallas for a couple of years there. We're getting into the later ones. Don't worry. They acquired Warren Reichel for Randy Burridge. Not a biggie. They then flipped Warren Reichel to Toronto for a 4th-round pick that became Sebastian Carpentier. I'm looking for a name. I'm looking for somebody that's worth talking about. Oh, this is interesting. The LA Kings acquired Byron Dafoe and Dmitry Kristich for a 1st-round pick and a 4th-round pick. That 1st-round pick became Alexander Volchkov. Yes. This wonderful GM that we're talking about, how great he is, drafted Alexander Volchkov, who was not an NHL-level player and is really, honestly, one of the biggest busts that I've seen. Because he was really talked about, and Washington was really excited about him. And, you think they're excited about the Alex they got now. They were really excited about that Alex back then, and it just didn't work out. And then I'm looking for anything of they acquired Anson Carter for a 4th-round pick, which became Ben Story from Colorado. That's a win. Anson Carter was solid for them. And then we're really getting into towards the end of it here. Keith Jones, who's now a TV commentator, a 1st-round pick, which became Scott Parker, and a 4th-round pick, Chris Barch, for Curtis Leschyshyn and Chris Simon. Leschyshyn was then 7 days later traded to Hartford for Andre Nicolishin. So it took 2 games for Poile to say, yeah, I don't want this Leschyshyn guy, and trade him out to Hartford. Bit upsetting, I'm sure, for Leschyshyn to get moved twice in a week. You don't see that anymore unless it's on waivers. You don't see that as far as a trade goes. Chris Simon, I hate the guy. I think most NHL fans do. But Chris Simon went on to put up some decent totals with Washington. He had that 30-goal season, for instance. And Nicolishin was a good player. So I'll give them the win, even though giving up a 1st-round pick, I mentioned before, is often a mistake. In this case, it turned out to be Scott Parker. And then his last move His last move as Washington GM was to trade for Adam Oates, Bill Ranford, and Rick Tocchet from Boston for Jason Allison, Jim Carey, and Anson Carter, a third rounder which became Lee Gorin, and a conditional second round pick which became Bobby Allen. I'm giving the win to Washington on this one. Bill Ranford came in as insurance in net. Rick Tocchet was toughness up front. And Adam Oates went on to have some very good seasons with Washington. I'm trying to remember how many years he played in Washington. That is Lyle Odeline. Why does that go to Lyle Odeline? That shouldn't go to Lyle Odeline. That's still... the Adam Oates link goes to Lyle Odeline. Adam Oates and Lyle Odeline aren't the same. Get it together. I can't believe they're making me look up Lyle. I'm not looking up Lyle Odeline. See what happens? Now I'm making that mistake. Adam Oates, just looking up his time in Washington. Just talk amongst yourselves for a second. Yeah, Oates played in Washington for 5 seasons. Played 5 seasons in Washington. He was not Lyle Odeline. And I'm absolutely giving a win to the Washington Capitals on that one. Jim Carey flamed out quickly in Boston. Anson Carter had a few good seasons and then was gone. Lee Gorin was never a full-time NHLer. Bobby Allen never made it. And Jason Allison, let's see if this takes me to Lee Gorin as well. No, everything, or like if one's going to take me to the wrong guy, the other one should too. Jason Allison played 4 years in Boston. One of them he was dealing with injury, which of course is what derailed and finished his career. Jason Allison was one of those guys who had premier talent offensively. But as much talent as he had offensively, he just couldn't stay healthy. And then when he was healthy, they always talked about his foot speed. You'd see him score 3 points in a game. But his speed. So when you look at his time in Washington, 594 wins, 454 losses, 124 ties. It's a victory for Washington because he made them relevant. He made them good. He made the deals he had to. He brought in premier talent. And right now, Nashville has the premier talent. The table is set right now for the Nashville Predators to win a Stanley Cup. If the Nashville Predators are going to win a Stanley Cup, it'll be either, I would think in the next couple of years, maybe 3 years. But he has made them relevant throughout their time. They've never gone through a full rebuild. They've never torn everything apart. They've never gone through a Buffalo-Edmonton-style rebuild. Now, they've never reached the heights of a Chicago Blackhawks or a Pittsburgh Penguins after a rebuild either, but they've never really had to do it. And that has to do entirely with David Poile, with the fact they've only had 2 coaches. Stability. There's always stability with the Nashville Predators. They have an identity. They've created this great fan base, and even in the midst of rumors that they were going to move to Hamilton, Poile never strayed from the plan. He never tore anything down. He never wrecked the team. He just keeps trucking along. And for that, he is one of the better GMs in the NHL. Again, for me, is he the best? Well, in 35 years, he has yet to get a Stanley Cup ring on his finger. And I think we can all agree to some extent, better or for worse, a GM can be measured more by Stanley Cup rings than can an individual player. Because the GM's putting those pieces together, and then that team gets to gel or not. And it usually rests on the GM, the responsibility for that. This also points to how well things can work out if you don't just knee-jerk fire a GM. If you keep a guy in place for a while, he can right the ship. And sometimes they lose trades. He's lost his share. Lately, he's been pretty good. We'll see if that continues. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I managed to keep this under half an hour. I did it. On this day of victory, thank you for being here to witness it. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through and you just happened upon this video. And I'll talk to you again soon.